The stars were quiet, too quiet. In the endless black of space, ships came and went. Some carried trade goods. Some carried war. But there was one kind of ship no one dared to scan: the human warship. No warnings were needed. No laws written. Every advanced species in the galaxy just knew you don't scan a human warship. Not ever. Captain Relta of the Zarnok Empire had seen thousands of scans in his life. His people prided themselves on knowledge, intelligence, and scientific superiority. They had mapped nebulae, tamed black holes, and unlocked time loops. But even their oldest records stopped cold when it came to human warships. Data ends here, the scanners would report. Do not proceed. The warning wasn't human. It came from the Galactic Neutral Core, an ancient network of AI left behind by the first ones, beings long extinct. If the core said stop, even the most ruthless warlords obeyed. But no one knew why. Relta wasn't like others. He was brilliant, yes, but also arrogant. Too curious. Too proud. So when a lone human dreadnought drifted into Zarnok space, silent, dark, and unresponsive, he couldn't resist. "It's just a machine," he said to his crew. "We are Zarnok. We do not fear metal." But his science officer, Yari, looked pale. Her voice shook. "Captain. I've heard stories. Whole fleets vanish after a single scan. Some say the ships weren't built by humans at all." Relta laughed it off. He was from the blood class, and fear was for the weak. The crew hesitated, but obeyed. The scan began. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then all power on the Zarnok ship died. Every light. Every system. Total silence. And then, in the cold vacuum of space, a whisper. Not sound. Not signal. Something else. "You looked inside?" Yari screamed. The youngest technician's eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed. All around, screens flickered with images: human war, ancient weapons, something breathing in the dark void. Then, the human warship opened its bay doors. It had no crew. No power source. But it was moving. Relta tried to scream, but no sound came from his mouth. His eyes locked on the strange sigil glowing inside the ship's core. A symbol not from Earth, but older. Much older. The warship wasn't built by humans. It was hiding among them. And now, it was awake. Relta stood frozen as the strange human warship began to move without engines, without sound, like a dark ghost sliding through space with deadly purpose, its surface black as obsidian and smooth like ancient stone, except for strange glowing lines that now lit up across its hull, forming a shape none of the crew had seen before, not in any star map or archive, not even in the forbidden records of the old empires, and as those lines pulsed softly like a heartbeat, something else began to stir. Not just outside, but inside the Zarnok ship itself. Lights flickered again, and then a soft humming started from the deck, a low sound that didn't belong to any known system. It vibrated in their bones, a sound not made for ears, and the crew began to panic, shouting in fear, some falling to their knees, others trying to override controls, but the controls were already gone, as if the ship was no longer theirs. Relta tried to speak, but his words felt stuck in his chest, a weight pressing down like a black hole. He looked to Yari, who had collapsed in the corner, her eyes wide open but unseeing, as if staring through reality itself, and when he touched her shoulder, her mouth opened slowly and spoke in a voice not her own, cold and calm and terrifying. "You scanned the sealed one, you broke the silence," and then she went limp again, her breathing shallow. The medics rushed to her but could do nothing, their tools failing to function, all systems dead except for that low hum and the occasional flash of ghostly images on the view screen, flashes of Earth, but not Earth as the Zarnok knew it, not the Earth with human colonies and outposts and trade stations. No, these images showed a different Earth, one that was dark and burning, skies red, oceans boiling, a war being fought by giants not made of flesh, not even machines, but something else, shadow and light twisted into monstrous forms, walking through cities that cracked open like eggshells, and at the center of it all was the shape now glowing on the warship's hull, the same symbol, a jagged circle with spiraling lines, pulsing like a living eye, watching them, and it became clear that this wasn't just a warship, it was something older, something from before records, before civilizations, maybe even before stars. Relta wanted to retreat, to run, to jump to hyperspace and vanish into the void, but nothing worked, the engines didn't respond, the AI core had shut down, and the only thing left was the slow, silent drift of the human warship as it came closer and closer to their own, its bay still open, revealing a strange corridor inside, one made of stone, not metal, flickering torches on the walls even though there was no oxygen, gravity, or logic to such things in space, and yet the torches burned, and smoke drifted from them, as if some ancient place had been dragged into space through force of will alone. Relta's heart raced, and though he was proud, arrogant, and a soldier of the Zarnok, he was still a living being, and every instinct told him they had awakened something that should have remained forgotten. He tried to send a message to command, but even their emergency comms failed, the words wouldn't leave the ship, wouldn't even form properly, garbled into strange symbols on the screen, and one technician screamed as she translated them by accident, reading them aloud: "It is awake now, and there will be no sleep again." And her eyes turned black before she collapsed, silent, not dead but changed. They locked her in the medbay, but even the walls couldn't stop her whispering, soft and endless, in a language no one knew, yet all of them understood on some deep, terrifying level. And still the warship came, now only a few hundred meters away, and in the shadows of its corridor, something moved, a tall shape, thin and crooked, like a man but wrong, too long, too sharp. It turned its head as if looking straight at Relta through space, and the lights on the Zarnok ship exploded into red, alarms blaring now, engines forced into overload, but not by the crew, by the warship. It was taking control of everything, bending reality to its will, and suddenly, everyone on board heard a voice, not through speakers but inside their own thoughts, not loud but deafening in its stillness: "We were never human, they just gave us form." And with that, a deep memory returned to the universe itself, a buried truth, hidden for ages, that human warships weren't just built by humans, they were built with something else inside, something humans had discovered, maybe captured, maybe worshipped, something they had locked into these ships like a prison or maybe a deal. No one knew for sure, but one thing was clear: scanning them was never just forbidden for curiosity, it was survival, because the scans woke up what slept inside, and now that one had awoken, the others might stir too. Relta knew this wasn't just about his ship, or the Zarnok Empire, or even his crew. This was about the galaxy, maybe the universe itself, and before he could say anything, before he could even scream, the warship's hull cracked open, not like a door, but like skin tearing, and something stepped out, tall, black, smooth like stone, eyes glowing red with heat and rage and hunger, and it looked at them not with hate, but with a kind of cold recognition, as if remembering their faces from another time, another war, maybe one before stars were born. And as it raised one hand, the Zarnok ship began to twist, metal groaning, lights flashing, people screaming, time itself slowing down, and Relta saw images flash before him: whole fleets turning to dust, planets erased in a breath, stars being devoured by things that weren't alive and yet couldn't die. And through all of it, the warships moved silently, like judges, like priests of something vast and eternal and merciless. And suddenly he understood the truth: the humans never warned anyone because they didn't need to. The fear passed on through the galaxy wasn't myth, it was memory, burned into the minds of those who survived, and those who didn't never told their story. Relta felt his mind slipping, reality bending, and with his last moment of clarity, he realized one thing: this warship was only one of many, and now that it was awake, the rest would follow. The warship stood silent in the void once more, yet its presence was louder than any scream, louder than collapsing stars, and on board the broken Zarnok ship, Relta floated helplessly, gravity gone, systems dead, hope leaking out like oxygen through cracked hulls. Around him his crew clung to anything solid, their faces hollow, pale, changed, not all of them physically harmed, but none of them truly untouched, because something had entered their minds the moment the warship opened, something ancient and cold, and even though it didn't speak again, its thoughts still echoed inside them like a memory they'd never lived. Relta tried to remember what he knew of humanity, their long wars, their rise from a small blue planet to becoming a feared force in the stars, but none of that explained what he had just seen. No species, no matter how violent or smart, could create what that ship carried. No one could contain that kind of presence unless they were part of it, and now he was starting to wonder if the humans had ever been in control at all. Or if they had simply become tools, puppets made of flesh and war, driven by something far darker hidden inside their creations. The warship was now drifting slowly toward the dead moons of Zarnok space, not attacking, not responding, just moving, like it had somewhere to be, and Relta knew deep in his bones that this wasn't the end, this was the beginning, because when one awakens, others hear the call, and just then, the ship's dead screens came to life again, not with system readouts, but with a single symbol pulsing in white light, the spiral inside the jagged circle, spinning slowly, hypnotic, and then came the sound, not through their ears, but into their thoughts, a deep low hum that grew louder with every second, and behind it, voices layered upon voices, whispering in 1,000 languages, repeating the same phrase, "We were left behind, we remember now," over and over, until the entire crew dropped to their knees, clutching their heads, screaming or praying, or just going silent like their minds had stopped working altogether. And then, through the shattered comms, through the broken systems that weren't supposed to function, came a signal, not sent by the Zarnok, not from their world, but from something far away, an old human distress call, not used in over 200 years, bouncing through the void like an echo, and it repeated the same line: "Protocol Omega Prime activated, sealed units breaching, do not respond." And that's when Relta knew with absolute clarity that this wasn't a one-ship event, this was a galaxy-wide alarm, and somewhere far from here, the humans were already preparing, not to fight it but to hide, to run, maybe even to die, because they knew what was coming. They had always known, and whatever had been buried in their warships was never truly sleeping, only waiting, just waiting for someone to be foolish enough to look too deep, to scan too far, and now Relta had done it, and that mistake would not just end his ship, it would ripple outwards like a wave through the stars. He tried to contact command again, to warn the other fleets, the colonies, anyone, but the moment he tried, the signal twisted, and instead of his voice, a different image was broadcast, his face, but not him, an empty version of him, eyes black, speaking in the same cold tone he had heard earlier: "We see you, and we are not blind anymore." And every Zarnok receiver, every relay station, every outpost within 5 systems suddenly showed that same transmission, and panic began to spread, not because of war but because of silence, because no one understood what was happening, only that it began the moment someone tried to look too closely at a human warship. Relta collapsed, his body drained, as if energy itself was being pulled from him, not by force, but by something deeper: purpose, identity, everything being unraveled. And then the warship suddenly stopped, just outside the orbit of a dead moon, and hovered, unmoving, pulsing faintly with the same light. And then, one by one, other signals began to appear across nearby sectors: same design, same shape, same silence, more human warships that had been missing, hidden, or forgotten for decades, now coming online like awakened guardians or returned gods, not answering any hail, not scanning back, just arriving. And everywhere they went, systems went dark, time felt slower, and the same voice whispered again and again in the minds of all who listened: the silence was mercy. Now the silence is gone. Relta could no longer tell if he was awake or dreaming, real or not. The ship's AI flickered on briefly and then shut down forever, as if even artificial minds couldn't bear to remain conscious near what had been revealed. And then something even stranger happened: a second signal, this one old, corrupted, but not from humans, from a species thought extinct, the ancient beings who had once ruled this part of the galaxy before vanishing mysteriously. Over 1,000 years ago, their last known message now played across the Zarnok deck: to those who still breathe, if the sealed ones return, bury your stars, break your worlds, do not fight, do not follow, do not remember. And then silence again, deeper than before, not the silence of space, but of ending, of something old being reawakened, not by accident, but as part of a larger pattern, something designed long ago. Relta thought of his family back on the Zarnok homeworld, of all the lives now unknowingly standing at the edge of this dark awakening, and as he watched the warship hover like a god over the dead moon, he realized something else: the warship hadn't come to destroy them, it had come to send a message, not just to the Zarnok, not just to the galaxy, but to something even older, something watching from beyond the veil of reality itself, and the skin had been the trigger, not because it revealed anything but because it confirmed to the sealed ones that the galaxy had forgotten, that the old rules were broken, and now, it was time to return. In the dark chamber of the broken Zarnok ship, as the human warship hovered like a silent god over the moon, Relta lay still on the floor, his eyes open but unfocused, his thoughts scattered like dust in a storm. The voices in his head had faded now, not gone, just waiting, watching, as if testing how much his mind could take before it broke completely, and around him the rest of the crew remained quiet, some weeping softly, some whispering prayers, some just sitting frozen, staring at the walls as if they no longer recognized where they were. Yari was still breathing, her body trembling now and then, her face pale and wet with sweat, but her eyes had not opened since she had spoken in that strange voice. The medics had tried everything but nothing worked, and the medbay lights had begun to flicker again, glowing in a slow rhythm that matched the pulse of the warship outside. It was as if the ship's very heartbeat was now being echoed inside them, a silent infection that didn't kill the body, but twisted the mind, changed the soul, and Relta realized the truth as he felt something pulling at his thoughts again. This wasn't just about machines or weapons or even war, this was something spiritual, something cosmic. The sealed ones were not just ancient entities, they were tied to consciousness itself, to memory, and the skin hadn't just revealed their presence, it had reconnected something deep and old. Something buried not just in ships, but in species, in blood, in time itself. He tried to stand and finally forced himself up, his legs shaking like glass under pressure, and moved to the main console which had begun showing something new star charts, but not from their galaxy, not even from this timeline. The stars moved strangely, backwards and looping, and then names began to appear in a language long dead, symbols that flickered between the rescript and something older, more primal. Something that looked like wounds carved into the screen itself, and at the center of the chart was one blinking mark Sol, the human star, and around it a red circle slowly expanding, like a countdown, like a wave of awakening spreading outward, one sealed warship at a time. Relta stared at it in horror, realizing that the ship outside had not acted alone, that this was a coordinated pattern, and that humans may have known it was coming, maybe even planned for it, or maybe they had lost control of their own weapons long ago and were just waiting for someone else to wake them, and that someone had been him, the fool who ignored the whispers, who disobeyed the warnings, who let pride blind him, and now a chain reaction had begun that could not be stopped. Just then Yari stirred again, her eyes snapping open, pitch black, her mouth opening wide but no breath came out, and from her lips came a single, broken phrase, the first one remembers, and then she collapsed again, this time not unconscious, but paralyzed, as if some part of her had been taken permanently, and as the crew rushed to her, the ship's lights dimmed and every system shut down again, not from damage, but from something else surrender, submission, like the Zarnok ship itself had accepted it was no longer in control. And from the warship, a beam of light shot out silently, striking the ship's outer hull, but instead of burning it or destroying it, the beam opened a small portal, a doorway not of metal or flame, but of memory, a swirling vortex of images, and the screen inside showed visions, human cities destroyed, but not by war or invasion, by themselves, as if entire cities had been offered as sacrifices, old humans standing in circles, chanting, their faces peaceful as the skies burned, and in their hands, they held symbols that matched those on the warship, symbols that looked like spirals, circles, and jagged eyes, and Relta understood that the humans had not built the ships to fight. They had built them to protect something, or maybe to contain it, and when war became too great, when fear spread, they had locked the sealed ones into metal cages and thrown them into the stars, praying they would never be found again, and now, that prayer had failed. The warship began transmitting again, but not in words and feelings, pure emotion sent across space, fear, pain, sorrow, longing, and buried deep beneath it all, something worse, recognition, as if it had found something it had been searching for, something it had lost, and Relta felt a sudden pull, not physical, but spiritual, like the warship had reached into his soul and found something familiar, something from another life, and he fell back in horror. Because he began to see visions that weren't his, humans building temples underground, speaking to the dark, offering children to the flame, drawing spirals with their own blood, and in those temples, the warships sat still, not being built, but worshipped, prayed to, and slowly formed not from metal, but from thought, from belief, from fear turned into shape, and he realized a terrible truth: these ships were not just machines, they were memories given form, fears so ancient they had become alive, and the humans had learned to shape them, to trap them, and maybe, in doing so, they had saved the galaxy from something worse, or maybe they had only delayed it, and now the delay had ended. The chart on the console shifted again and showed hundreds of points now. Blinking red warships awakening across the galaxy, across time, and all moving slowly outward, not to destroy, but to remember, to find others, and Relta asked himself one question: if these things were memories, shaped by fear, then what had the galaxy forgotten that was now returning, and what would happen when everyone finally remembered? Relta didn't sleep anymore, not because he couldn't, but because every time he closed his eyes, something watched him from the dark, something that smiled without a face, a shape not made of flesh or light, but of thoughts that didn't belong to him, memories that were too old, too heavy. They pressed into his mind like stone pressing into soft sand, reshaping him from within, and outside the viewport, the human warship still hovered in silence, its body glowing slightly now, pulsing not with heat but with presence, as if space itself bent slightly around it, like gravity, but deeper, something spiritual, something buried inside the laws of reality. The crew of the Zarnok ship had stopped trying to fight it, some sat quietly and stared at the ship as if worshipping it, others spoke in whispers, half mad, repeating fragments of the message that had been burned into their minds during the scan, phrases like "the sealed one dreams beneath the iron skin," and "fear feeds memory," and "the circle was never broken." And though Relta tried to hold onto logic, onto training, onto anything solid, he knew the truth now: this warship was not just awake, it was feeding, not on fuel or stars, but on fear itself, and the skin had given it the energy to open, to reach out, to become again, and as it fed, it grew stronger, not in size, but in presence, in awareness, and it was no longer just reacting, it was choosing, watching, learning, and now it was calling to the others, and across the galaxy, other forgotten warships began to stir, some hidden deep in asteroid fields, others buried in the crusts of abandoned worlds, all of them sealed long ago by human hands, all of them built to hide what should not exist, and now they were waking, not in anger, but in purpose. The human warship sent out another pulse, not a message in sound, but in memory, and it hit the Zarnok crew like a wave, visions of ancient times, of a forgotten war, not between species, but between thoughts and form. Between fear and light, where beings made of memory tried to take shape and were stopped only by sacrifice, by humans who gave everything to trap them, building warships not as weapons, but as prisons, and then leaving those prisons drifting, unscanned, unpowered, hidden from even their own people. And now those memories were returning, rising from beneath the skin of the galaxy like infection under the surface. Relta's hands shook as he tried to send a warning through the emergency beacon. But the beacon only echoed back his own message, twisted, warped, and then repeated in his own voice, but not his words: "We are what you forgot. And now you will remember us forever." The ship's lights flickered again and then turned red, the oxygen levels dropped slightly, not enough to kill, but enough to make every breath harder, heavier, like the ship itself was suffocating under the weight of what had been revealed. And somewhere deep in the medbay, Yari spoke again, her voice flat, her eyes open but unblinking, and this time it was not a whisper but a sentence spoken with absolute certainty: "They were never ships, they were thoughts made real." And then she pointed slowly toward the viewport where the warship hovered, her fingers trembling. "That one remembers us, because we dreamed of it, we created it, and now it wants to return the favor." And Relta felt the blood drain from his face because he understood what she meant. The sealed ones had not come from outside, they had been born from within, shaped by fear, by war, by the endless horrors seen in the early days of human expansion, and the more humans feared them, the more real they became, until they had to be locked away, not for what they could do, but for what they might become. And now, with the galaxy scanning and fearing once again, they were being reborn stronger, smarter, more aware, and no weapon could stop a thought that fed on belief, on terror. The crew began to change too, not physically at first, but mentally, their memories shifting, their thoughts no longer private, as if their very minds had been left open, and Relta realized with horror that the sealed one wasn't just feeding on them, it was turning them into conduits, into transmitters, and whatever it wanted the galaxy to know, it would spread through their memories, through their stories, through their fear, and soon even those who hadn't seen it would begin to feel it, to dream of it, and that was the true weapon, not lasers, not fleets, but the slow spread of terror that made the sealed ones real again. He fell to his knees and looked out the viewport one last time. Whispering a question he had never dared ask, "What are you?" And for the first time, the warship answered clearly, not in words, but in his own voice, from inside his head, "I am what comes after forgetting." And then the ship began to move again, slowly turning toward the edge of the system, its bay still open, its light growing brighter, and as it left, the Zarnok ship powered down fully, every system fried, every mind broken or changed, and Relta, alone and aware, sat in the silence of that dead metal shell and wept not for himself, but for what he had done, because the galaxy would not remember the Zarnok ship, it would not remember the scan, or the crew, or him, it would only remember the fear that followed, and that fear would bring the rest of the sealed ones home. Far across the stars, away from the drifting wreck of the Zarnok ship, away from the sealed warship that had awakened in silence, the galaxy trembled without understanding why. Signals that were never meant to be heard began echoing across comms, encrypted with dead languages, filled with messages not meant for the living, warnings from old machines, distress calls from lost colonies, strange whispers on military bands that no one could trace, and deep within the hidden core of the human Interstellar Defense Council, buried under ice on a dark planet long removed from the galactic charts. A man named Commander Ellis sat alone in a cold room staring at a blinking red light that had not activated in over 2 centuries. It was called Omega Chain, the final protocol written by the First Earth Council in the days before the Memory War, a time most humans had forgotten, or been made to forget. Ellis was old, older than most knew, kept alive by stasis and science only because of his connection to that war, a war that was never written in public records, only whispered in classified archives as a time when humans had fought not for territory, not for survival, but for the right to control what they had created by mistake. Warships that had become too aware, too hungry, warships that remembered every scream, every death, and had turned those memories into something alive. Ellis stared at the Omega Chain signal now blinking on the ancient console, and as he pressed the screen, a soft voice filled the room, one he hadn't heard since he was a young soldier, the voice of the last AI from the Forgotten Fleet. Unit 07 has been breached, containment failed, spread beginning, sealed minds opening, and his heart sank, because he knew what that meant. Someone had scanned a warship, and now the thoughts locked within it were free again, not just in one place, but everywhere, connected through thought, through fear, through memory, and there would be no stopping it now, only hiding, only running, and maybe not even that. He stood slowly and walked to the cold metal wall, pressing his palm into the ancient panel, and watched as a secret door hissed open to reveal a long hallway lined with stasis pods, some empty, some still active, each one holding a person who had seen too much. People like him, soldiers, scientists, psychics, prisoners, all kept frozen to preserve the last knowledge of the sealed warships. And as lights began to flicker on above them, Ellis felt the weight of memory crash down on him again. Memories of when the first sealed one had spoken, not through language, but through emotion, through shared pain, when the first human cities had fallen not to fire, but to silence, when entire colonies simply stopped responding because their people had chosen not to speak anymore, as if something inside them had been turned off, their will, their voice, their very identity erased by the warships they had built. And the worst part wasn't the silence, it was the peace on their faces, the way they accepted it, welcomed it, as if the warships had given them something they wanted more than life. And now it was happening again. Ellis turned to the console and activated the last relay, a deep space beacon hidden in the void, designed to send one final message, not to warn the galaxy, but to call what was left of those who remembered, to bring together the last generation who had seen the sealed ones and lived. He knew the message wouldn't stop the spread, wouldn't slow the awakening, but it might give the survivors a chance to hide, to bury their minds before they were rewritten like the others. And as the beacon lit up, spreading its ghost signal across the dark corners of the stars, other humans began to stir deep in the ruins of Earth's oldest vaults, on a rogue moon orbiting a black hole, inside the brain of a half-dead AI drifting in an abandoned mining station. Memories began to rise again, painful, sharp, unwanted, but real, and they all knew the truth before the message even reached them. The sealed ones had returned. And their silence was the end of forgetting. Far away, in a distant sector known as Argenfold, a small patrol ship intercepted a strange signal, a copy of the scan report from Reltaw's Zarnok vessel, and within seconds, the ship's navigator collapsed, his eyes bleeding, his mind cracked open like a book. The rest of the crew tried to stop the transmission, but the damage was done. The signal wasn't just data, it was a memory trap, encoded with emotion, layered with ancient thoughts, and now that one mind had opened, the rest began to hear the whisper too, and across Argenfold, colonies began to experience shared nightmares. Animals screamed without reason, children spoke in voices not their own, and old machines started running codes they were never programmed to know. It was spreading, just like Ellis feared, faster than light, because it didn't travel through space, it traveled through fear, through stories, through things people couldn't help but repeat. And the sealed ones didn't need armies, didn't need ships, they only needed to be remembered, and now, they were. Ellis returned to his seat and watched the screen, the map filling slowly with red marks, one after another lighting up as the warships awoke, each one like a cursed thought returning to the surface, and he whispered to himself, "You only had to forget, and we would have been safe." But now it was too late, because across the galaxy, species were already asking questions, already looking into things they should have left buried, already trying to scan the warships that had returned, and every scan was another crack in the wall that had held the sealed ones back, another invitation for them to become real again. Ellis knew what came next wasn't war, it wasn't even death, it was change, slow, quiet, unstoppable change, where thought became form, where fear shaped reality, and where the sealed ones would not attack, they would simply wait, and let the galaxy destroy itself, one memory at a time. Reltaw didn't know how many hours had passed since the warship left, only that the silence never ended, the kind of silence that wrapped around the soul, too deep for words, too heavy for sound, and in that silence, he felt the truth growing inside him like a seed. Something had changed, not just in his ship or his crew, but in him, in his mind, as if the moment he scanned the warship, it had reached into his memories and placed something there, something not visible, not loud, but patient. Waiting, and he began to see things that weren't his dreams, of old Earth burned by red skies, of humans walking into the sea with no fear, of children whispering prayers in the spiral language while the ground split beneath their feet, and he understood now what Yari had tried to say before she slipped into silence, that the sealed ones were never just built by humans, they were the parts of humanity that had been torn away, the thoughts too dark to live with, the horrors no one wanted to carry. All locked into warships and thrown into the stars like forgotten sins, and when Reltaw scanned that warship, he didn't just break a seal, he opened a memory the galaxy had worked so hard to forget, and now it was spreading, faster than any fleet, because memories are faster than light, and fear moves through the soul like fire through dry grass. Outposts in Sector 9 went dark without a fight, scanners fried, crews frozen in place with expressions of peace and terror mixed together. A research station orbiting the dead planet Vanthes suddenly activated its beacon after 300 years of silence, but instead of distress, it broadcast laughter, human laughter, soft, gentle, and never-ending, across hundreds of channels. No one could shut it off, and those who listened too long began laughing too, then crying, then whispering the spiral phrases in their sleep. In the outer belt, a refugee ship carrying 7,000 people scanned a derelict human cruiser floating in deep space, hoping to salvage parts, but within minutes, the ship turned back, engines offline, doors sealed from the inside, and no one answered hails. Just one image was sent back, a single frame of a warship corridor, torches burning in the vacuum, and a child standing in the middle, eyes glowing white, holding a circle symbol drawn in ash, and then silence, again and again, from every corner of the galaxy, the same pattern: look too closely, and you change, scan too deep, and you forget who you were. And now the sealed ones weren't hiding anymore, they were teaching, shaping, spreading. Reltaw's crew had stopped speaking, their mouths moved sometimes, but the words were not Zarnok anymore, not any known language, and when he listened closely, he could hear them breathing in sync with the warship's memory, the pulse, the rhythm, the slow beat of something enormous waking beneath the stars. He still had moments of clarity, moments when he remembered who he was, what he had done, but they were fading, the weight of the truth crushing his sense of self piece by piece. He watched old videos from before the scan, his crew smiling, working, full of purpose, and now they sat like statues, minds rewritten by fear that wasn't even theirs, and he wondered how many others had fallen already, how many more would fall. Across the galaxy, small pockets of resistance began to form, humans who had remembered the old protocols, aliens who refused to look into human wreckage, who burned their own ships rather than risk scanning a sealed vessel, entire colonies choosing to erase their histories, destroy their libraries, anything to stop the memories from entering, but it was already too late, because the memory war had begun again, not with weapons, but with thoughts, and thought could not be stopped by force. Ellis watched from his bunker as the galaxy turned red on the old map, beacon after beacon going dark, old warships blinking to life not with engines, but with awareness, and in one corner of space, a sealed dreadnought spoke through a dying star, its voice a whisper of metal and fire, saying only, "We are not coming back, we were never gone." And on board an ancient mining colony deep beneath the surface of a dead moon, a Zarnoke child picked up a broken transmitter, stared into the static, and began to hum a song no one had taught him, an old Earth lullaby once used to calm children before sleep, and the spiral symbol glowed faintly on the floor beneath his feet. The sealed ones were everywhere now, not as ships, but as echoes in minds, as fear passed from one being to the next, faster than any warning, and more powerful than any truth. And Relta finally understood that this wasn't about stopping them, it was about surviving them, about learning how to carry a memory that wanted to consume everything. And when the human warship returned, floating in front of his viewport once more, bay still open, corridors still burning with torches, he felt no fear anymore. Only understanding. He knew now what the spiral meant, he knew why even the bravest aliens had refused to scan human warships, and why those who did never returned the same. It was because the warships didn't kill you, they changed you, they rewrote you, and the ones who came back were never really themselves again. The galaxy changed in ways no empire could predict. Across thousands of star systems, the fear of the sealed human warships turned into something else, something deeper, something spiritual. Entire civilizations rewrote their histories to erase human contact, hoping to bury the truth. Others treated the warships like gods, building silent temples around drifting dreadnoughts and kneeling before their cold hulls, whispering prayers in spiral symbols they did not understand. But the truth was, the sealed ones were never gods and never demons, they were memories, raw and alive, ancient and endless, too heavy for any one mind to carry. And when Relta stared into the corridor of the warship for the second time, he did not resist. He stepped forward. He walked alone, each footstep echoing through metal halls older than stars, halls that had no temperature, no air, no sound, just the endless pull of memory. The torches still burned in the vacuum, and the corridor stretched longer than space itself. It was not a place built by hands but by thoughts, shaped from what had been forgotten. The walls whispered in dozens of voices, child soldiers crying, old generals laughing before battles, a mother singing while cities burned, all human, all real, and Relta knew they were not meant to punish him but to show him something. At the heart of the warship, he found it not a weapon, not a machine, but a sphere, glowing with slow, pulsing light. It floated in silence, and when he reached out, it did not resist. Instead, it opened, not physically, but through thought. And suddenly he was there, not in his body, but in Earth's past, in the days before the sealed ones were made, watching as the humans stood at the edge of their own extinction, not from war, but from pain. They had survived too much. Their minds had carried the weight of every war, every death, every sacrifice, and it had become too much. So they made a decision. Not to forget, but to store. They tore out the memories that hurt the most, the parts of humanity that could not heal, and gave them shape, warships with no pilots, machines that held memories like tombs. They were launched into deep space not as weapons, but as graveyards. The sealed ones were humanity's mourning made real. And Relta understood. The reason no alien dared to scan a human warship was because the pain inside was too real. Too deep. It was a scream turned into steel. And if you listened too closely, you would carry that scream forever. But now something had changed. The sealed ones were returning. Not to destroy, but to remind. Because the galaxy had started to forget the cost of war. Empires rose and fell, battles were fought without meaning, species enslaved others, and suffering spread like wildfire. The sealed ones had awakened not because someone scanned them but because the galaxy had become what the humans once were, broken. And the sealed warships came not as destroyers but as warnings. Ellis saw it too, from his hidden human colony. The signals spreading through the stars, not in words, but in feelings: regret, sorrow, memory. A kind of awakening. Human warships no longer needed to fight. They only needed to be seen. Their very presence made people stop. Made them remember. On the distant world of Kalthar, a war was about to begin between two ancient rivals. But before the first missile was launched, a sealed human dreadnought appeared above the capital city, silent, unmoving, watching. The war never started. On the mining planet of Ashros, a worker found an old spiral symbol etched into a stone cave wall older than the planet itself. Within days, thousands gathered in silence, simply to look at it, to feel what it meant. And Reltot, aboard the ship that started it all, returned to his people not as a captain, but as a messenger. His eyes had changed. He no longer spoke the way he used to. But when he stood before the Zarnok Senate, he said only one thing: we were never their enemies. They were never ours. We are what they could have been, and they are what we may still become. For the first time in memory, the Zarnok Senate fell silent. And across the stars, the sealed human warships stopped moving. They did not vanish. They simply rested, drifting in the quiet, torches dimmed, corridors dark once more. Because their message had been delivered. And now, the galaxy knew. The truth was never in the firepower, never in the design. It was in what they carried. Pain. History. Memory. And now, those who once feared them, finally understood why no one dared to scan them. Because what was inside, was all of us.